All right, thanks for coming back. Got the intrepid souls who are sticking it out through the end of the day. Thanks so much for sticking around. I'm really enthusiastic and excited about this final panel this afternoon. It's sort of through the arc of the day, starting with some initial thoughts and exploration of the deeper background, some of the deeper complexity through the previous panel, broadening that conversation a little bit and thinking about kind of where we are at the moment. And then finally concluding with this last panel today, no pressure, but looking towards the future and thinking a little bit about some of the challenges certainly, and hopefully some of the opportunities as well as we move forward into the future. So let me briefly introduce them and then turn the floor over to them. To my right is Mark Haggerty, who's with Headwaters Economics. Tom Schneider, who is a former member of the Montana Public Service Commissioner, an engineer and an energy consultant. Dan Zolnikoff, who is a representative from House District 47 and chairs the House and Energy Committee. Wendy Hutchinson from Millennium Bulk Terminals. And then Karen Baumgart, who is the Director of Workforce Development. Again, looking forward to kind of where we proceed from here. And so with that final note, I will turn the floor over to our panel.
Thanks, Eric. So after being here for most of the day and hearing that it is a fool's errand to predict the future, welcome to the panel about the future. I want to start with a quote by this gentleman. Next slide. And if anyone knows his name, you can yell it out at the end. And this is from the 1970s, when all of the major coal development was starting in the West, and especially in Montana. He said, "And when we are through with that, and when the landscape is quiet again, when the drag lines and blasting rigs, the power shovels cease to rip and roar, and when the last bulldozer has pushed the slag pile into place, and the last patch of barren earth has been seeded to grass or grain, let those who follow and repopulate the land be able to say, our grandparents did their job well. And only if we can say that will we be worthy of their respect." Anyone know who this is? Not K. Ross Toole. Art Link from North Dakota, exactly. Thank you, Mr. Yellowtail. You weren't supposed to answer. I use this quote because there's a couple important things about it. The first thing is that it's not anti-coal. It's also not pro-coal. It's about policies. It's about the choices that we make about how we use our resources and about who benefits when we use those resources. So I want to use my time to focus on the policies that we have in place and put aside for a minute whether we should or we shouldn't, because I don't think that's actually the question that we're grappling with today. Coal's going to be around for a little while. We've been doing it for a little while. We have other options, including tourism and wind, and all of these should be treated the same way. How do we do it? Why do we do it? And what are we going to get out of it? So as we approach the end of life for coal, what did we do? What did we create? That moment in the 70s was actually pretty remarkable. We created the largest, most extensive energy system in the world through these massive mine-mouth power plants and railroad systems that allowed us to link the entire West together in a reliable, domestic, relatively inexpensive energy system. It was a remarkable task, and it took a lot of collaboration. It took a significant amount of coordination. The grid was not ready for this. We had to retool the grid in a lot of different ways to accommodate all the new coal power. And the Western states largely set the terms, governors like Art Link and all of the leaders here in this room from Montana that helped shape how this would happen. Next slide. So as we approach the end of life, how did we do? Where are we, and where do we go next? This is a map of coal deliveries from mines across the West to power plants that are likely to close or have actually been scheduled to close. And you can see that Wyoming and Montana are going to experience the largest impacts of coal-fired power plants that are yet to happen. Mines in Montana could lose about 60% of their deliveries based on deliveries that happened in 2016. So the risks are here as we close. So next slide. I was involved with some research with some collaborators at Montana State University. We looked at all of the power plants that are closing or scheduled to close in the West. And we found all of the economic transition plans that we could find and read them and tried to understand what they were doing. And really what it comes down to is this argument of comparative advantage versus a resource curse. And we heard a little bit about this morning. The comparative advantage story effectively says if you have coal, if you have a resource endowment, you're better off. You have something that's valuable, and when you extract that, you can turn it into employment, revenue, benefits to the community, and over time, that can lead to a more diversified economy and a virtuous cycle of growth. The alternative narrative says that these resources, if not managed properly, can become a curse. If the revenue is misappropriated, if it's used for tax breaks and you become too dependent, it can actually make you more exposed to risks of political change, of markets, and actually you can become poorer and have slower growth over time. Notice again that this is not inherent to the resource, it's about the choices that we make. Next slide, please. So we looked at the literature around resource dependence, and we came up with a bunch of different things that the economists and rural sociologists and others recommend these communities should try to do in order to be more resilient over time. The first one is addressing lost revenue, which is what I'm going to focus on. The second is thinking about economic geography and the changing economy and how that affects your opportunities and coming up with strategies that are sensitive to your opportunities. We found that restoration is really important in these communities, partially because you want to avoid a legacy of contamination that can restrict your growth, but also reclamation can lead to new opportunities. If you're able to improve the landscape and develop amenities that are associated with growth, you can actually turn reclamation into an economic advantage. And the last thing is this idea of willingness to change and resilience in communities. Your bonding capital within your community, your ability to work together, and also your bridging capital out to regional institutions and states to get assistance is absolutely critical. And one of the ways that you measure that is your acceptance of change. Next slide. So I'll foreshadow the results here very quickly, but I don't want to dwell on them. We found that strikingly, not a single community has a revenue transition fund in place. There's no revenue left from decades of mining that is dedicated to supporting institutions in communities. Everything needs to be negotiated. Communities are largely left to themselves to try to negotiate. There's no regional coordination. There's very little assistance coming from the states. So we found that communities are largely going at this by themselves. There's not a lot of learning between communities, and there's not nearly enough support to try to help transition. So I want to talk about just one piece of this. So I'll start, next slide, with just some economic context that was covered a little bit this morning. As the energy transition is taking place, we're also experiencing a major structural transition in the economy. What's happening in Montana is that all of the growth is occurring in 5 counties. 75% of new jobs since 2000 have occurred in just 5 counties. A quarter of all new jobs have happened just in Gallatin County. And those jobs are different from the old jobs. The structural changes have favored industries that employ more highly educated labor. And there's an agglomeration effect. Companies locate in areas where there's already like-minded companies, where there's an educated labor pool to hire from, and that feeds on itself. And so fewer and fewer places are actually reaping the benefits of economic growth. The state of Montana is growing. It's actually growing quite rapidly, faster than the West, faster than the US as a whole, but it's concentrated. Not everyone is participating in that growth. Next slide. I'll skip that one. You can go to the next one. It's not easy for the cities that are growing. In Bozeman, we have skyrocketing housing prices. There's displacement of a lot of people who are not participating in that economy, even in the areas where it's occurring. So it's not easy for the states. Or not easy for the cities. We need policy to help them. But next slide. It's also not easy in the places that are being left behind. Not only are rural areas not competing as well for those jobs, the traditional industries that have supported Montana for a long time, it's harder and harder for those industries to support the state in the way that they did before. Incredible productivity gains across the board have meant that there are fewer jobs in natural resource sectors. One of the estimates about manufacturing is that only about 10%, maybe up to 25% of all the jobs lost in manufacturing have been lost to trade, exported to China. The rest of it has been because of productivity gains and shedding of labor in manufacturing plants. There's a tremendous amount of manufacturing happening in the United States, by value more now than in 1980, but we're doing it with a fraction of the people. And so rural places that traditionally have been more dependent on manufacturing and natural resources are not competing in the new economy, and they're losing opportunities in the old economy. Next slide. And that, of course, is causing a lot of strife. Next slide, please. So, one of the biggest opportunities in natural resources is not employment necessarily, but revenue. Right? We heard about this from Todd O'Hare. Coal industry pays disproportionately in terms of revenue compared to its share of GDP. And that is actually by design. Our tax structure in the state is geared towards taxing things that we produce, right? We're very good at taxing coal, we're very good at taxing oil, we're pretty good at taxing timber and other things that we can count, right? Otherwise, we're basically relying on an income tax in the state and property taxes. What we're not taxing is the growth in the cities. We're not taxing the high-wage services that are driving growth in Bozeman. We don't tax tech. We don't tax any of the kind of high-end technology that's being developed. And that mismatch creates a real problem in the state. And one of the reasons that we had a special session and reasons that we have an interim committee right now is to try to understand, does Montana's tax policy actually work to benefit the state anymore? And how do we change it? So for rural areas, that's particularly important. Next slide. We actually do a really good job taxing coal, as Todd pointed out. The chart on the left shows our effective tax rate. We're over 11.1%. So every dollar of value mined in coal in the state, we get 11 cents back. In Utah, they get less than a penny. We actually do quite a good job. 25% of that goes back to local governments. $22 million a year in direct distributions from the gross receipts tax and from federal mineral royalties, and another $7 million in grants and loans, largely out of the $1 billion coal trust fund, which, if I'm reading my news right today, might be about $900 million today after the stock market. But next slide. But what we've done with that revenue has created increased dependence. Largely, we have used that revenue to lower taxes on other sectors. We don't tax the economy where it's growing. We're relying on coal to provide the services that we all want. That creates a lot of risk if coal is going to go away. We looked at all of the counties in the West that mine coal or have a coal-fired power plant, and we compared revenue from those sources on an annual basis to their governmental budgets. And Bighorn County, Montana is the most dependent county in the West on annual coal production. That means if that annual coal production slows or goes away, the county's bankrupt. Same thing in Colstrip, right? 80% of the town's revenue comes from the plant, I think I heard today. Literally cannot afford for that plant to close. Literally cannot afford for those mines to shut down. It is a real problem in the state. Next slide, please. But these are policy problems. These are choices that we've made over time. This is an example. Our school equalization law requires that every school in the state fund a minimum budget. That minimum budget is made up first with state aid and then local sources of revenue. That's your local tax levy. If you have coal gross receipts taxes, you're required to use those coal gross receipts to lower your local levies. It's mandated tax breaks during booms and mandated tax increases during busts. This is exactly the wrong way to go. We want to be able to invest money for the long term rather than using it for ephemeral tax breaks that put us in a riskier position. Next slide. So what are some of the solutions? We've been thinking about a couple. The first is that we need to unwind dependence. We need to use our coal revenue to make long-term investments. We need to build a transition fund for Colstrip, for Bighorn County, for the tribes, so that when coal finally goes away, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 50 years from now, we're resilient. We have other options. We can maintain services. We can guarantee to the residents of Montana that we can take care of them. And we need to negotiate on behalf of these communities. We can't ignore that. We've been successful so far in getting revenue from the utilities that run Colstrip, that own Colstrip. We need to do more of that, and we need to keep doing it. But most importantly, even if we're able to generate more revenue, we have to make sure that we treat coal revenue as a special source of revenue. This is not annual revenue to use to fund our operating budgets. We need to set it aside. We need to make long-term investments to make sure that the state moves forward regardless of the future of coal. The more time we have, the better we are. But we should prepare for a future where coal declines more quickly as well. So thank you very much. I'll look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Hi, I'm Tom Schneider. It's been a while since I've been up on a stage like this. Let me give you a 2-second snapshot of where I come from, just so you'll have a sense of that. So I come from Phillipsburg, Montana, hard rock mining country west of Butte. My forebears were hard rock miners, came over from Germany in 1880. 4 generations later, Phillipsburg the mines there have ceased in the early 70s, and I had a chance to work in Butte. At the lowest level I ever got was the Mountain Con at 5,000 feet. So I understand a little about mines, a little about labor. My grandfathers were blackballed for organizing activities in the early 1900s. So I'm empathetic and have some sense of some of the angst that you're feeling. The way that it worked in Peaburg was that about every couple of years we would, my dad would get a notice, usually just before Thanksgiving, to say that the operations were shutting down. Have a nice holiday. And they'd generate a little capital over the new year, and they'd start up again in January or February. And that was the kind of cycle that we grew up in. Anyway, switching gears now to what is really important is this future. We've seen a lot of evidentiary information today in terms of trends. And I'm going to throw out just a few dates to put it in perspective, try and tie it together a little bit about what we're looking at in the relatively short term. Colstrip 1 and 2 retirement dates not later than July 1st, 2022. That's a 47-year run since the opening of those plants. That's a run that's pretty much unparalleled in the Montana economy. Colstrip 3 and 4, 2 of the investor-owned utilities have announced that their depreciation schedules will be accelerated and end in 2027. A couple of the utilities in Oregon are looking at 2030 exit dates from coal. There is a major contract expiration that occurs coincidentally, I think, in 2027. That's the Montana Intertie Agreement. And that is an agreement between Bonneville Power Administration and the 5 investor-owned utilities that originally owned pro rata shares of the Colstrip generation plant and the transmission system. That might be the most important document in the room. And again, that contract expires 2027. That deals with the operation of the twin 500 kV transmission system from Colstrip across 2/3 of Montana, exiting up in northwest Montana near Hot Springs. Again, that involves Bonneville and the 5 IOUs. Those IOUs that invested in the Colstrip generation plants, 1 and 2 with Puget and the old Montana Power Company, and then Colstrip 3 and 4 with 5 IOUs, including Northwestern. 70% of that ownership was held in the Pacific Northwest. And your customers for that output are customers in the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, Washington and Oregon. So when we talk about the angst related to the change in the market, and damn those people in the Northwest for putting the clamps down in terms of their changing approach to their energy future, those have been your customers for the last 45 years. And in my view, they can be your customers for the next 45 years, albeit customers of a different energy source, a different driver. The most valuable link to Montana's energy future, its lifeline, is that Colstrip transmission system. And it was mighty, mighty controversial at the time those plants were proposed. Not only were the generating plants controversial, but that transmission line that crossed 2/3 of the state of Montana was extremely controversial. And in fact, the 5 investor-owned utilities had to enlist the involvement of the Bonneville Power Administration, the federal agency, the big dog in the Pacific Northwest, to build the transmission from Townsend to the Idaho border up near Hot Springs. So although it was controversial at the time, once it was approved and constructed, it became a sunk cost for financial purposes as well as largely for environmental purposes. It's in the ground, it's operational, it is the lifeline, and it's essential that we preserve that economic lifeline going forward. So the trends are pretty clear. We've talked some about the export limitations of coal. We've talked about the dates that are important on Colstrip 1 through 4. The replacement resources are going to be, in my view, largely renewables, largely wind, some pumped hydro storage going forward. And I think we're well positioned as a state to have a real impact on that Pacific Northwest market, that same market we've relied on for 45 years. We have wind that has a very attractive relative capacity factor, that is, it produces a relatively high portion of the year. The timing of that wind production is also very good for the Pacific Northwest. It's primarily winter peaking. It matches their needs, both on a daily and seasonal basis. It has real attractive economics for the Pacific Northwest. What doesn't it have now, and why hasn't it developed more robustly? It hasn't had transmission. Northwestern made a real attempt to develop transmission to the south in the Misty project a few years back. That was not successful for a whole variety of reasons. But right now, the potential for new renewables has basically been stranded for the lack of transmission. And building transmission is tough. It impacts communities all along the route. It's expensive. So the ability to use what we have is just really critical, and again, our lifeline. Let's talk about the community impacts, because I know a lot of you are here with a very keen ear and interest and passion about that. The way that I look at it is that it is an extraordinary opportunity. Given the realities of what we've talked about in terms of trends, there is an extraordinary opportunity for Montana to make the best of, and in fact enhance and broaden our economy through the use of that lifeline and loading that lifeline, not with coal-fired generation, but with renewable generated electricity. In addition to that Colstrip contract, transmission contract, the other really important documents that I have up here are the transmission studies, reliability studies associated with the loss of 1 and 2, the loss of 1, 2, and 3, the loss of 1 through 4. They've been conducted over the past 4 years or so. They were originally, a lot of the original work was done related to the Clean Power Plan. Those same studies and extensions and deepening of those studies is what is required now. And one of the real bright spots about what is going on is that the Bonneville Power Administration Administrator and Governor Bullock have formed a Montana Renewable Resource Development Action Plan. And that action plan really hinges very much on that transmission system, the ability of that transmission system to accommodate the transition from coal-fired baseload generation to renewables. What does that do to reliability in terms of all the different dimensions? Inertia, frequency, voltage, and VAR support. All of the technical aspects they're going to have to demonstrate in order to be able to use that line for the long haul to transmit renewable energy. Tremendous amount of work has been done. There's an action plan due June 30th to the governor and head of Bonneville. It's brought together all of those investor-owned utilities, Bonneville, the public utility commissions from all 4 of the affected states. It has generally the right people in the room to get to the meat of the contract issues, as well as all of the technical issues. I'm optimistic about that. I think that that's probably the most optimistic that I've been for a long time. And I'll close with this, really. In terms of local community impacts, which I got diverted from, I really think the community of Colstrip and that area down there that has been reliant on and is so impacted by, in every respect, again, has a very bright future. It's not an identical future to what you're used to, But I really think that you have a great opportunity for long-term, high-quality employment in really satisfying kinds of roles. So let's talk about that for a second. The glide path is relatively known. So we say 2027, we say 2030, another one of the important dates. Somewhere in that range, even if you're off by 2 or 3 years, you have quite a bit of planning time available. The work on 1 and 2 restoration, reclamation, the work related to the damage to from the fly ash pits, the aquifer impacts, the things that were talked about a little bit today, that is high quality life cycle work. Clean up your mess when the project ends. Really good, satisfying, I think, prideful kinds of activities that give your workers, displaced workers, an opportunity to remain in a meaningful way. The decommissioning and dismantlement of those big plants is going to require high-powered work by the people that know the plant the best. Again, satisfying, high-quality work for a pretty extended period of time. The reclamation and restoration I've talked about. The community impact funding. One of the other dimensions of the lawsuits have been the $10 million community impact funding source out of Puget. Avista looks like they'll be pledging an additional, in addition to the $10 million from Puget, $3 million from Avista in terms of a settlement on their merger application. You got $4.7 million from, I think, from the feds, as I understood it from some of the governor's remarks. So that's a pretty good pot of seed money to help address retraining, focus on local impacts, want to make darn sure that the community has the water supply from that tremendous water that is being pumped out of the Yellowstone and has been servicing those plants for decades. Make sure that that water right and transfer is used to beneficial use in the community for potable water supply as well as reclamation, restoration work. Lots of good things that can be done there. So I think Colstrip particularly is very well situated. They're also situated well for the injection of renewable and development of renewables in that region. You've got a tremendous electric infrastructure there in terms of the substations, all of the communications necessary for reliable operation of the grid. You have something that nobody else has. So I really think that the opportunities are exciting. I think you have a glide path over a number of years where your community can craft its transition. I hope you're excited about it. I would love to have you be excited about it and optimistic about it, rather than being in a real angst mode, trying to hold on to something that really isn't in the cards. That's my perspective. And I'm hoping to contribute to that in any way that I can. I've been really pleased to have been part of this study work that's being conducted now, and hopefully we can use that transmission and you can end up being winners. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you all for having me. My name is Daniel Zolnikov. I am a state representative. I chair the House Energy Technology Committee in the legislature. I'm also from Roundup, Montana. Funny that I hear a lot of talk on the communities and no one ever mentions Musselshell County, so please add that in. And I just want to start on that. My brother is actually a mining engineer, graduated from Tech, who works at a coal mine in Australia. So they're the guys who are digging the 2 to 4 foot seams at some points, and he has a drill blast background. Being from Roundup, the coal was and is important, although there were some tax changes that kind of had an impact on the community. At least that was there. My politics is a little bit unique because I do try to talk to everybody at all times. Sometimes people don't want to talk back, and that's fine, but I do have an open door policy for if you want to have a conversation, I'm going to try to collect as much information as possible. Energy policy is complex, and that goes with what we can do, what has happened, and everything in between. So really quick, I'm going to say I'm not going to talk about anything federally because I can't do anything federally. Yeah, we could write a letter to Congress, to the president, but I'm more worried about state policies. Obviously, I'm in the state legislature, and regional policies, because what we do doesn't impact the region. What the region does, it does impact us. So my focus legislatively has been completely economically, not environmental. And it's very important to put that out there because being from an economically depressed town where everybody grew up poor, no one knew anybody was poor because we were all poor. And that was fine because there wasn't a status thing. We were just all at the same playing level. But it's also not really acceptable that was the standard, and that is going to continue to be the standard in a lot of different areas in Montana. I mean, face it, we can do a lot better, especially with our resources. So with energy, there are a lot of moving pieces. We've heard that the entire time. And I kind of went at it from a different approach of what is possible versus what is ideal. And to know what's possible, you must understand the players. So you start with the main ones. You have industry from fossil fuels, you have the utilities, you have the alternative energies, you have environmental. Those are very important to keep in mind because one is funding another one to sue another one to win in the end. And what industries do, both sides of the aisle, is they kind of get to their political party, and then they have people on the right who they talk to, people on the left who they talk to. Then we get into the legislature and we fight at each other, and then no resolution comes from that. I do not think that is a smart tactic, especially when the policy is very complex and has a huge impact in our state. And so the more that you understand who's behind everything, the more you can actually have some very interesting conversations where people say, from maybe the more liberal side, you know what, these industries are important, these taxes are important. And from the more Republican side or conservative side, you know what, there may be timelines, there may be other opportunities. And that creates a very positive conversation. So there's more players to keep in mind, including transmission lines that have multiple owners, there's federal agencies, there's pancake rates, there's states, there's Oregon, Washington, California, who tend to be our main customers besides Montana. And with those customers, we can dictate to them what they should buy. But if people stop buying Coke and start buying water, it's really hard to keep supplying Coke, especially when they're doing state regulations saying in the future we are going to be using less of this and more of this. And they are our customers. That is just something you have to take into consideration. There is a state budget. So if there is transition over time, it's going to impact the budget. So you have to keep that in mind. And then there are Montanans. And so there are obviously new opportunities, new companies, but there are communities like the one I'm from, Colstrip, that will have a negative impact on it. So I'm trying to outline how complex it is when people say, figure out a policy solution and do it today. It's not very easy. So there are 3 scenarios I want to kind of hit on that I can say would simplify this to a level of understanding. And first scenario is no transition. If we do not do anything to transition, we say coal is here today, tomorrow, in the future, we may be able to do some legislative maneuvers to maintain it here for a while. But what that has the possibility of turning into is a Detroit situation. So if well, if and when from the political climate that happens, 2030, 2040, what is next? And to be ready for what's next, you have to take action today. Or you could do the overnight transition where we say we jump on board with the Washington, California, Oregon model and say, we are going to divest from coal tomorrow, and that's the plan. And you know what California is dealing with is how do we make the grid reliable and stable? Oh, we have to now put extra energy or extra money into storage to make sure it can handle it, and sometimes it cannot. And so that overnight transition where we're going to save the world from itself, that doesn't work and it doesn't make sense. So you don't want to be to Detroit and you don't want to be California, which I think are both Democrat states. Just kidding. All right. So energy can be fun, right? I get along with my Democrat colleagues. I try to. So I'm trying to keep all of these things in line. So we have jobs we have to want to maintain, but there are future prospects. Rural areas are the hardest hit. So saying, oh, goodbye tomorrow, I'm from that rural area. I know guys who work in the coal mine. And you know what? That is a lot of money for those jobs in a place that is extremely economically depressed. It has an impact. It's not something you can forget about. Then you talk about people say, well, there's a trade-off of tax dollars, and then you have different industries coming in or CO2. And if you own, and a lot of times when you're talking to different segments, they only have one thing in mind. We're going to take care of our community only, or we're going to take care of the environment only, or we're going to take care of industry only. And if you come from any of those simple angles, you're usually going to come to the wrong conclusion. And that's what makes this so difficult is sometimes you are trying to do what's right politically without an actual solution that makes anybody happy. And you know what, I can handle it, but sometimes it's pretty tough when you have to be the bad guy. So then we're going to add in the social climate and changing political views. Even if clean coal happened tomorrow, I have bad news. California, Oregon, Washington, they don't believe there's clean coal. So that is a real concept where you'd have to educate entire region that say we had 100% the clean, like no CO2 emissions, and some new invention happened, you'd still have to overcome that hurdle that, you know what, you guys can start buying this coal power, because when they think of coal, they think of negative. They don't think of any way it could work. They're not there to reach in the middle, and bad news, they have the House and Senate in most of those states to dictate the policy based on voters. So here's the biggest problem I came to was we have politics. Politics are chosen by people, which is the social climate. So the people, especially we're talking about Washington and Oregon, they don't want coal. I was actually born in Oregon. They don't want coal energy. So then politicians dictate it, or they do ballot initiatives. So then the politicians say, well, we are going to use less fossil fuel energy in the future. Okay? Say it's good, say it's bad, it doesn't matter, that is what it is. And then what you have are investors. And investors want to minimize risk. So if the regulatory climate, not in the next 4 years, 8 years, even with Trump here, and say he gets reelected, after that, you gotta look at these investments 25 years out, 20, 25, 30 years out. And so there's not gonna be an investment, or there's gonna be, I'm assuming, minimal investments with the possible negative political climate due to the social aspects of things. And so it makes this all very difficult because sometimes you want to say we're going to do everything we can, we're going to keep it here, but we cannot dictate to those states what is going to happen. So I'm just trying to paint a pretty clear picture of the complexity because you heard a lot of this and this angle and this angle, but from our elected angle, it is complex. So there's also new markets. Like I said, my brother's a mining engineer in Australia. They're selling to Asian markets. I think that is the ideal opportunity, no matter what perspective you have, because if we do have better coal and they are buying it, why wouldn't we want it to be ours? I mean, that's basic economics 101, right? And it helps our state, and we have a large supply. But again, Washington, Oregon, don't want that. So we have to deal more with Canada. And again, I do state politics, not federal. So it's about that's where I stop with that one. hopefully there are more solutions. I don't exactly have that one. And then we have to do the trade-off of reliable energy, and there is, energy is reliable, obviously, when you can turn it up, turn it down, and then we talk about alternative energies. Alternative energies do have a possible future in Montana too, but you need it to be reliable, which is where pump storage comes in. So there are so many moving pieces. I'm going to go back to the three scenarios of no transition, some transition, overnight transition. My goal in the legislature, I'm running again, if it's Republicans hold the House, which I'm assuming they will, just say assumption I'm going to hold on to, I'd be chairing that committee again. I'm not going to do the overnight transition. I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think it makes sense, and I think that hurts people. And I'm not going to look at it from the no transition standpoint because these states are our customers and they do want a different product. So how can we, as a state legislature, maintain coal continuing for as long as possible, 2022 for 1 and 2. I heard the earliest date, some people say 2027 for 3 and 4 for Colstrip, but then up to we'll say 2038 to 2040. My goal is to continue that as long as possible, which means I have to develop relationships with the legislators from other states, which I have, who chair some of these committees, to say, all right, see what you're doing. Is there a way we can make this work? You can slow this down. You can start investing back in Montana. And that goes with the transition of, if one is slowly going down, we want to maintain it as long as possible, obviously. And then we want to see what new investments are going to come into Montana, which means we have to have a conversation and a very economically friendly business environment for new investments. I don't care if they're wind or solar or pump storage or something that doesn't exist yet. I think there's never a problem with looking at new opportunities economically in the state. So I think the last and probably the most important piece that a lot of people haven't discussed is the consumers. So there are always new products coming online, or there's always new projects that are coming up. And the thing we forget to talk about is consumers. If there is a transition to new energy sources because we want to lower CO2, I know it's some people's really important thing. For me, it's not. I'll just say it. I'm all about economics. I'm all about money invested in Montana. If that is the thing, and say we do transition to CO2-free energy production tomorrow, there is a very high cost to consumers, to people going to college, to families, to their energy bill. And if that is the route people want to go, you are hurting a lot of people who are lower income, which Montana has quite a few, lower, middle. Everybody's trying to make it. That is $20 a month, $40 a month. That adds up as well. So with all these decisions, you want to have the best long-term transition without hurting people in the short term, who are the consumers who, most of them, as you can tell, are not here today. So I kind of just want to give you a huge overview from what I've tried to understand the last 5 years. Always willing to take questions, so thank you.
I'm Wendy Hutchinson, and I appreciate Daniel putting me in the vision of your future. So, I work for Millennium Bulk Terminals. We are working on a coal export terminal in Longview, Washington. My background is in the coal industry. I worked as regulatory affairs manager for the Black Thunder mine in Wright, Wyoming for several years. And much of my family and my children work there as well. So I'm extremely invested personally in this project. And my husband and I still ranch in northern Campbell County, only about 20 miles from Montana. So a little bit about the project first is our location. We are in Longview, Washington, not Longview, Texas. And we are on the Columbia River, really where the Western Railroad system first meets the deep water ports that take products to market on the ocean going. This is Longview, Washington. It was built in the 1920s by the timber industry, and the section along the Columbia River that you see, the entire 6 or 7 miles of that is all industrial mill sites and has been zoned industrial from the 1920s. Our address is 4029 Industrial Way. It's not Riverside Drive. And Millennium is located up in the corner there on the home of an old Reynolds aluminum smelter plant. We are in the process of cleaning up that site, and we want to redevelop it into this coal export terminal. This is the plant site. I will tell you the buildings on the right-hand side were built in 1941. From the time that they were broke ground till they were making metal was 6 months. We are not quite on the same schedule. And the coal terminal itself will take out most of the buildings on the left side of the photo that you see, but there's still room for development of other products as well for the site. I do want to say that the coal terminal, we have adapted to this town. It is a town about the same size as Gillette, Wyoming, about 30,000 people. It is full of good, hard-working folks that know how to work. And the only real difference in my mind between Longview, Washington and Gillette, Wyoming is Longview's wrapped themselves around the timber and the maritime industry for obvious reasons, and Gillette's wrapped itself around coal and other energy sources. This is a town full of union Democrats, and this is a town full of non-union Republicans. But other than that, they're all the same people. We do have a project labor agreement with the Kelso Longview Building Trades to build the coal export terminal. Guarantees union jobs for them sourced locally, and that they have the ability to train apprentices to build the next generation workforce for this community as well. And we do have an agreement with the longshoremen for operation of the terminal once it gets going. This is a kind of a mock-up of what the terminal would look like, but suffice to say there's existing rail to this site, and it is on the existing navigation channel. It'll consume about 200 acres of the 500 and some acre site, and we will be building a rail terminal essentially to bring the coal in with unit trains, and our goal is to be able to ship 48 million short tons. The bulk of that would come from Montana, obviously, because it is the shortest rail haul, but we are serviced by both the Burlington Northern and the Union Pacific Railroad. So here's some of the stuff you don't get in the headlines, right? You've probably seen a few headlines, another permit denied, another permit granted, all that sort of good stuff. But what you don't see in the headlines is the state of Washington issued a final environmental impact statement for this project, and they did conclude that the project could meet all state and federal environmental standards. Number one fact, all state and federal environmental standards. We have had our permitting challenges, no doubt, but in spite of this, we did have the state of Washington deny a water quality certification in spite of the fact that this 14,000-page document says we'll have no impact to water quality. So this is why we're in a lawsuit with them currently. We've had another permit issued. We've had a sublease denied, and a judge determined that the DNR of Washington was arbitrary and capricious. And our parent company has filed a federal lawsuit claiming that the state of Washington is meddling with the Commerce Clause of the United States of America. So I would say the project's moving from the regulatory phase into the judicial phase at this point. We have been at this for about 6 years now. So another fact from the environmental impact statement is that the coal that moves through Millennium will not contribute to global climate change or increase CO2 emissions. Essentially, coal's a very fluid market, obviously, but when it all boils down to it, the coal coming through Millennium is just going to displace other coals in the marketplace that would have been burned in those same power plants. We do think there's a robust market for the coal as well. And one of the other things of interest, this is just the coal piece of it, but they did do a life cycle analysis of greenhouse gas emissions If Millennium exists, sourcing coal in the United States, the greenhouse gas emissions from that source coal all the way to the burning in Asia, that was compared to the status quo of we're going to source those coals in other countries and then we're going to burn them in Asia. And when you look at the document, the state of Washington did conclude that the existence of Millennium would cause a net decrease in CO2 emissions globally. Now, that's not what they announced when they put the EIS out, but that is the conclusion buried in a technical report in, I don't know, page 13,006 or something like that, right? But it is in there. So one thing about the market, we've talked about this quite a bit, but this is what has happened to coal consumption on the planet for the last couple of decades. The circle in the United States disappears almost, but it gets smaller, but the circle in Asia gets bigger and bigger. And that's the market we want to serve. And we do expect our clients are really South Korea and Japan, as Todd noted. They are the closest markets to us. And our job really is to, frankly, bring these coals in and compete with Indonesia. And Indonesia has a much shorter haul to China than we do. So our parent companies are not really looking at trying to market coal in China, but are really already shipping coals from the Decker mine through Canada to those markets in South Korea and Japan. So I throw this up. It's a very busy slide, but it's to really bring to the forefront the fact that coal is a very, very portable product. It is prevalent across this planet, and people are using coal and continue to use coal to generate electricity for the welfare of their nations. And all we're trying to do at Millennium is to get the United States in the game. So there are limits, as has been discussed earlier, to coal production or coal transport off the west coast of the United States, and we're trying to fix that bottleneck. Anyway, one of the things I think is important to note that, you know, Japan just announced they're going to build 40 new coal-fired power plants about a year ago. And, you know, holy cow, if we'd heard that in the United States, that we were going to build 40 new coal-fired power plants in the United States, we'd be jumping for joy. And like I said, we just want to get Montana coal into that market. So I hope I've addressed some of the concerns that you have on climate change. As far as our project is concerned. My boss was over in Japan and took this photo, and I like it because it says something that we don't see here in the United States. It says that this is a valuable resource to us and we need it for our survival, along with a lot of our other energy supplies as well. But I do want to address one thing that I get when I talk to audiences in Montana and Wyoming, that there are a lot of people that say, why should we send our coal to Asia? Why should we even do that? We've tried so hard to be energy independent. Why should we even ship our resources out? And my answer to that is, we sent guys my dad's age over to Korea to die for that democracy. And we're not willing to send them a little coal to keep it? That's ridiculous. So with that, I'll take any other questions, but I do firmly believe in this project. I firmly believe that it is good for Montana, it is good for Washington State, and it is good for the United States of America.
Good afternoon. Good, I got some response, that's good. Eric, I have to apologize. He said I could sit, but I'd be the only panelist that sat, and then I'd be the lazy panelist, and that can't be. So thank you so much. My name is Karen Baumgart. I am the director of Billings Works, which is Yellowstone County's workforce development program here under Big Sky Economic Development. I have the longest title. Unlike my co-panelists, I don't have a background in coal and in energy. And so you might be wondering, well, why am I here? Well, when Chuck Tooley calls you to do anything, you say yes. And so, Chuck, I'm here for you. But I'm also here because workforce development is my background. And what I'd like to do is share the model that we have found success with here in Yellowstone County, and then to see if coal communities can replicate it or tweak it to have some impact as well for you. So what I'd like to start with is to acknowledge a theme that this panel is all about, which is about the future. And we can't predict the future, but what we do know is that it holds change. So what I'd like you to do for me is I want you to put your hands together, however they go naturally. See what I did there? I made you put your phones down. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to switch that up. Put a couple fingers in a line, just mess it up a little bit. How's that feel? Feels kind of weird, right? That's not normal. That's what change feels like. It's gross, actually. Gallup says that 70% of change initiatives fail. 70% fail. And recent studies show that 9 out of 10 people, when they're told if you don't make a change to your diet or your lifestyle, you're going to die of a heart attack, one of them changes. 9 are like, yeah, change is too hard. Even in the face of death, right? Change, no, I'm not going to do it. And so I don't tell you that to put you down. I tell you that to also remember that in times of change, we actually are more awake and we have potential to make some innovative movement. And so that's really the story of Billings Works. I'm going to tell you the model for it, specifically how it adjusts retraining issues, because that's what it seems most pertinent with coal and the future of coal. So first of all, show of hands, how many of you have heard of Billings Works or are part of it? Holy cow, that's amazing. For all the rest of you, I owe you coffee and an explanation. That's fantastic. Billings Works is a workforce council here in Yellowstone County, and it is made up of industry partners, public partners, and education partners. And we get together to actually strategize how we attack workforce development. So the 4 areas that Billings Works plays in is collaborating. We are always making sure that we're at the table and we have enough partners there to make decisions. We also serve as an employer toolkit. So we help inform employers how they can actually develop their workforce. We also work a lot with education and making sure that education is aligned with workforce so that it's relevant to what people are going to do when they get out, so they have jobs. And then finally, for Billings Works, because we're at a low unemployment rate, we work on talent attraction, right? So those 3 things of growing your own workforce, retraining your workforce, and then actually immigrating others into your community. So what I want to talk about are the 2 that I feel are most pertinent to the situation of coal, which is collaborating and then aligning with education. So as far as collaboration goes, I joke that it is my job to just host Thanksgiving a lot of times during the year, which means I have a big table and everybody's invited. And it doesn't matter if Uncle Joe tells bad jokes and you get annoyed with him, he's totally welcome to come too. And so this is what Billings Works does. We have everybody is invited to the table. So I'm curious about the makeup of today's audience. So if you'll do me a favor, if you represent industry, would you raise your hand? Raise them high. Panelists? Yeah, you gotta play too. Okay, if you represent education, raise your hand. Okay. And the rest of you, I assume, are public sector or politics, right? Raise your hand. Okay. Any interesting insight from that? What did you notice? What did you say, Tom? I'm a has-been. You're a has-been. You're not a has-been. What did you notice? What is the makeup of this room? It's diverse? What else? You got to shout it out. You can't be shy when I'm here. What'd you say? Industry and politics are about the same. So what we have found with Billings Works is that we need to have a diverse group at the table. So we need to have all of these partners. We need to have education. We need to have the public sector. We need to have Montana State, Montana Department of Labor and Industry. We need to have industry. But what's crucial for us to be successful is for industry to lead the conversation. Now, I don't say that because I don't care about educators or legislators. I love your opinions. But industry is the one that's going to change. And they're our client. We need to meet their needs. And so if they say, hey, the future of coal is going to look like this, how does an education partner and rally to create programs that are going to meet those needs? So I encourage you to think about that and see how you can have industry really lead conversations. Now, that doesn't mean the rest of us don't get to partake and participate. I have a really hard time not talking. but we have to listen to what are those needs going to be, and how can we look at the future needs and follow where industry is going to go. The second aspect I wanted to talk about briefly is the alignment with education. So really, if you look at the state of Montana, and I believe Mark had good statistics here, really, there's a lot of Montana that their unemployment rate is below 5%, which means there are jobs out there, and there are businesses that are looking for people to work for them. Now, I understand that that has some retraining that has to go with it, and that also may have some movement that has to go with it as well. And then finally, I also realized that coal industry pays well. And so as we transition these displaced workers, they may have to take a lower wage. And that is difficult, and that is difficult to do, but I believe if we can collaborate and bring people together, we can create some supportive techniques to do that. So right now, what Billings Works is doing really is working with Montana Department of Labor and Industry on apprenticeships. So how many of you have heard about apprenticeships, right? There's a lot of talk about apprenticeships. The unions, yeah, I got a hand over there. The unions are great at this. The unions have decided, you know what? Rather than just wait and be consumers of workforce, we really need to be producers of workforce. So how do we get in the game? So what I have worked with is setting up apprenticeships with industry and educators. Again, industry being at the forefront of that conversation. So as you look at, hey, what are we going to do with all these displaced workers? What are areas, what are industries that they can go into? Now I realize places like Colstrip, where coal is your industry, you're going to have to look at diversifying that economy. Where are places that people can go? And really, how can you retrain them in an apprenticeship model so that they get paid at the same time that they're learning? One thing I would suggest, Billings has the most post-secondary opportunities in the state of Montana. So, and we have a lot of online education as well. So how can you look at creating an apprenticeship model with an industry that's local to your community, where you can take your classes online and actually do the on-the-job training in your community? So that's a suggestion we've had. I also heard, where are the resources? How can we fund retraining and training purposes? One thing that we have at City College, we received a portion of the America's Promise grant, and that is actually money that goes to retrain displaced energy workers into areas that are good for Billings and high economies in IT as well as healthcare. And then finally, Montana Department of Labor and Industry also has the National Dislocated Worker Grant, and that is all about helping displaced workers in the energy field and coal get a plan of, hey, what's the industry I'm going to go into? What's the training I'm going to need? And I know that that is a big step, and it's vulnerable, and it's scary to look at what you might have to do next, but I guess I ask, what's the alternative? So how can we be proactive? And so in times of change, even though they're squishy and they don't feel good, there's also opportunity for us to pause and say, hey, where is the future going to go? And how do we support our people going into that? I promised I'd make it really short and sweet. So I'm going to sit and hopefully have awesome conversation.
We have about 20 minutes, I believe, for questions. So who wants to go first?
I work with large industrial customers, and I'd wonder if any of you on the panel have talked to the large industrials that buy in the open markets here in Montana. There's a group of them. They represent 32% of the power that's delivered in Northwestern's retail market, and they buy from Colstrip 1 and 2. And so their choices for instant generation are going to be radically changed in the near future. And these are very large companies, large employers, large tax base. And in your studies, has anyone talked to the large industrials who are in fact secondary customers of coal? There are other choices in state, or Kerr Dam, which is now owned by the Salish Kootenai. That's pretty much subscribed totally. The plant down in Hardin is closing that they could have bought from. So pretty soon they're left with going to have to buy from out of state, which increases their costs. So my question to you, everyone's talking about customers, but no one has represented that group of industrial customers in this conversation. So have any of you talked to them, looked at that, or even aware of the issues they have?
I can talk.
Yeah, go for it.
That's a great question, because, and I would say it goes both ways, is I talk to a lot of entities that have that conversation. That is one that has not come to the table, honestly. And I am very open to meeting with anybody, everyone, far left, far right, up, down, I don't really care. And they are not represented in a fashion that comes to the table. They honestly, very silent area. And it's like, I don't dig looking for, oh, what's this avenue, this little area I'm missing at? I'm here to talk with whoever who wants to talk, and they, I think, are equally quiet. So just want to put that out there. So if you are representing that, then I think the voice needs to be expanded, and it is their responsibility to do so.
Anyone else?
I have not, but I can tell you from back in the DREG days that they were very active players in advocating their position for choice and getting off the regulated energy market. So they are and have been very savvy, very bottom line driven, and generally have taken care of themselves pretty well, probably with a lot of your help. So I haven't seen them at the table at the various advisory committee things. Maybe they've been involved at Colstrip, but they have not been involved in that transition and transmission meetings in terms of the market. But they are an important market. They, along with the tribes and the co-ops, who also sometimes don't get involved. Anyway, the short answer is I have not.
Other questions? Over here.
I have a question about the transmission lines. We did a research project for the 10-year anniversary of the Renewable Portfolio Standard, and we had an opportunity to talk with a lot of people that were involved in trying to develop alternative energy. And the issue came up that was spoken about in terms of the transmission line from Colstrip. And at that time, you know, there was already, it was well understood that there would be retirement. Basically, throughout Montana, the prospect of opening up new types of energy really seemed restricted from the people we spoke about because of the transmission problem, which you brought up. So I had two questions. One is the transmission facility that comes out of Colstrip, does it have the capacity to tie into additional transmission lines that could come from other parts of Montana that have wind potential energy or solar energy potential, or would it be really tapped out just within the Colstrip area?
The Colstrip transmission is interconnected throughout the Northwest. There's a connection that goes down into Idaho. It's an existing line with PacifiCorp. There's a small DC intertie over in the Miles City area, very limited. It separates the western interconnection, which is synchronous, from the eastern interconnection. So there's very little capacity currently available. It's very limited going into Canada. There's some transfer capability both ways, but very limited. And they have a very aggressive, active market up there for renewables as well. So in the course of this project that I described under the auspices of the governor and the head of Bonneville Power Administration, the recommendation uniformly was concentrate on the Pacific Northwest. You've got the link there. You've got markets that are going to be displaced that need replacement power, and that's really the direction. But there needs to be some upgrades in terms of west of Montana, in terms of integrating it into the Pacific Northwest system. That's also part of these studies in terms of what can be done and what is the cost of those upgrades. So that's my answer.
Tom, what about the transmission lines? If the depreciation schedule indicates their end of their life is in 2027, does that mean that 2027, does that mean they aren't very reliable thereafter?
No, it just means that the commercial relationship, the relationship among the parties is going to change. I mean, there's some possibility that it'll be renewed under different terms. But right now, and that's why I held up that contract as maybe the most important document in the room, that contract right now, in some people's interpretation, is limited to the output from those coal plants. After all, that's what it was developed for. So there really is a live question, and people have actually suggested even to the federal courts that system could be abandoned because there's the provision in there that the Bonneville Power Administration could terminate and actually remove their portion of the transmission at the expiration of that unless it's renegotiated. So it really is kind of a wild card that even though I've been involved in things for a long time, I was not aware of the issue related to whether or not that line could be repurposed to transmit other electric generation for themselves or otherwise. So that contract is a very live issue now, and it's getting a lot of focus in this regional review.
But the lines are okay?
The lines are fine. In fact, those studies that I held up in terms of transmission reliability studies, 4 major studies have occurred in the last 3 years, 2 by Northwestern itself and 2 by an organization that they are associated with, the Northern Tier Transmission Group. They are the people that have the primary responsibility for the reliability of that grid, Path 8, which is the main 500 kV line. Those studies have been very positive so far. They're not definitive because they assume new resources to replace the coal at some assumed locations until they get actual contracts in place and transmission agreements in place. They won't run the really detailed study about all of the different reliability issues. But so far, very good results, very optimistic from my standpoint. So the transmission system, again, as I've emphasized, that is our lifeline. And it's an existing facility that has tremendous value as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, everybody. Wendy, just a real quick question for you. I think you were alluding to it. The folks in Longview, are they in support of your project? I would assume so, but could you maybe just touch base on that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the people in Longview are quite supportive of the project. Not that we don't have a handful of people that don't like us, but they really oppose every project on the river, so you can't take it too personally. But all the politicians in our part of the state and all of Southwest Washington support the project, as well as most of the eastern side of the state. There's a running joke in Washington state that all the voters the governor needs he can see from the Space Needle. And that's a fairly true statement. But we have really good local support, and it helps a lot. And I'll just, as a validation of that, every politician in Cowlitz County that has run on a platform opposing Millennium has lost. So there's your referendum. Yeah.
Can I add one? I asked if I could add one thing. So I lived in Vancouver, Washington, where she's, the general area she's talking about, and just moved back a couple of years ago. I can tell you that beyond that specific southwestern part of the state that she's described, the Columbia River Gorge is a very hot, the coal and oil exports are very hot topics going down the Columbia. So I wouldn't characterize it as just Seattle. I've been to a number of meetings out there where that is just like kind of a coal strip battle here.
Yeah, I do want to address one thing that I think is important for people in Montana to know is when you look into, and he is correct, a lot of the opposition that we have for our project gets bussed in from Portland. But when you look closely at the details of the permit denial that we had from the state of Washington, it was not based on water quality. It was not based on anything that had anything to do with coal. The real details when you get into it is the permit was denied because our project would be bringing 8 trains a day into Longview. So the state of Washington is basically saying 8 trains a day makes our project too big. And you know, the grain terminal that's just upstream from us brings in 4 trains a day, and every other trade is bringing in unit trains, right? And so I point this out because this playbook to stop the Millennium Project just because it's about coal can just be repeated for the next grain terminal or whatever the next commodity that your state wants to bring through Washington State. And that's something, we have to fight this fight not just for coal, we have to fight this fight for trade. And we hope you have your support on that because it isn't just about coal. It's about every other commodity you want to take through the state of Washington.
Mark, you talked a little bit about how really the driving economic force in the state now has to do with a number of more highly populated areas, and I assume that the lion's share of the work that's being done has to do with service industries, computer science, and other areas. And you know, this Montana is this place that's one of the most beautiful places on earth, and all around the United States in the big cities, there's a lot of crowding, traffic. It's getting incredibly expensive, so there's an enormous lure for people to come to Montana. And there are cities like White Silver Springs and your town, Roundup, that's really been doing some extraordinary work in really unusual ways, using the natural amenity, the old historical buildings, you know, putting in internet access and building these really wonderful opportunities. And I wondered, you know, in the spirit of this conversation, if any of you could talk about some success stories of how communities can transition from a traditional way of doing things, whether it's farming or coal or whatever, into a completely new service-based industry where it doesn't matter where you are. You could be doing work anywhere in the world through your local community. And I just wondered if any of you had any success stories to talk about that and if that's relevant to the topic today.
I would say that Roundup is not the model of, I live in Billings, so I represent out of Billings in the Heights area, but it is not the model of transitioning. It is, there is a lot more problems than solutions, a lot more need than money. And so I can't, maybe there's 1 or 2 projects downtown, but most of the big, nice brick buildings are breaking apart, and there's water come through the roofs, and there's no maintenance because there's no purpose or use, and they have like fake setups in the front, but there's really nothing going on. There is, I wanted to say this for the coal strip people, probably the #1 group is, we only know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know, and if you recognize you only know about 1% of the whole picture of what's gonna happen, it's important to keep in mind. So in the last year and a half, there's been, almost 300 megawatts of cryptocurrency miners entering the state that no one's talking about yet or just has begun to talk about. And the governor has been pushing the dams as the resource for the energy of those, and not Colstrip, from what I understand. And so there is a huge new market that no one saw 20 months ago entering Montana. I'll tell you this, Montana is considered the #1 state in the country, from what I understand, for cryptocurrency miners. Just think server farms, because cryptocurrency gets people scared and worried, they don't get it. Server farms. lots of processors, lots of energy utilization in Montana. So there is a need for a reliable energy source in the state of Montana. Now, I wish we could just reroute coal and keep it in the state, but you got utilities that own part of Colstrip, and they're trying to get out. No one's who's gonna buy the rest of Colstrip to keep that energy in the state. It gets complicated quickly, but there are new things always happening here, and we don't know what's gonna be next. So I just want to throw that out there.
So,
Daniel, I'd just like to add, because I deal with those folks calling about power for Bitmine, and there is no power for the dams available for them. All the power is spoken for. And they're talking about, right now under study, in the state of Montana, Northwestern has 1,000 megawatts of folks that want 1,000 megawatts of power for the Bitcoin mines. And we do not, and they have to buy it in the open markets, so they'd have to look for Colstrip 1 and 2 or somewhere else, but we don't have that kind of power in the state to accommodate those folks. It is exciting to hear about all those large users, but where are they gonna get the power? It's just gonna magnitude the problem that we have of generation resources in the state. So I do actually deal with those folks every day, every week we get calls for Bitcoin mines.
I'll just add something.
Sure, I like this.
I'm Lauren from Colstrip. It's a shame that Jim Atchison with Southeastern Montana Development Corporation couldn't be here. He wanted to, he just couldn't make it. But a server farm has actually been just added onto the end of the Colstrip diversification strategy. When you go onto semdc.org, you can read the whole strategy report. Unfortunately, you will not see the server farm on that list, but it has been added onto the working list. But I'm really glad you brought it up, because that was one development, one new idea they were able to add to the end of that we were actually pretty excited about. That's all I have to say.
So one of the things that is happening in Appalachia and other places of the country that have seen disinvestment and loss of industry, so the Midwest in the automobile industry, the Pacific Northwest in timber mills, right? One of the things that people are trying to do is figure out, how do you translate your comparative advantage in resources into a competitive advantage that makes you successful in the new economy? And what a lot of these communities have often are lower cost housing for maybe not great reasons, but it's relatively inexpensive. Often they have great amenities because they're in beautiful places, they're in natural settings. They might have a lot of recreation amenities. Colstrip is replete with them. And so how do you guarantee that a town like Colstrip can maintain those amenities over time, and then maybe think about what you need to be competitive in different markets? And so, you know, retirees, the coming baby boomer retirement wave, people are looking for places, small towns, a lot of them came from small towns, they want to move back to small towns that have healthcare, trails and amenities, cultural amenities, libraries, theaters, right? And so small towns can capitalize on that. And one of the big things in Montana is we're seeing a lot of concentration of employment, but there's a tremendous amount of income coming into the state too, that could potentially go different places. And so there's no silver bullet, right? I mean, you're not gonna get a tech company to open a large office building in Colstrip. You might get a server farm which uses energy but doesn't employ a lot of people. So how do you employ people, right? I mean, that's the big question. And how do you do it in a way that's more sustainable over time? And so it's really about thinking about what your competitive advantages are, leveraging those and making sure you can support them over time, rather than trying to chase one industry or one business, which often doesn't work.
We are, I was going to point out that we're basically out of time. And I think that's what you said is the most important thing, is we want all industries here. If there's server farms and wind farms and solar farms and coal, and we can sell coal in different ways and utilize it in different ways. The problem is, and we've seen this in politics, there are industry versus industry. And you know what? The more industries we have here is more diversified, the better our economy is. It's that simple. But when we have one bill to kill an industry and another piece of legislation to kill the other industry, that's not progress. That's not moving anything forward. That just keeps us fighting and tripping over our own shoes. So I just wanted to highlight that.
So real briefly before you head out today, I just want to say thank you again for coming out, spending the afternoon or spending the full day with us. Please keep an eye on our website, wheelercenter.org. We'll be posting the video from today's events, so if you'd like to be able to share some elements of this with your colleagues or friends, it'll be available there. We'll share that information also by email with you since we've got your contact information after today. In the meantime, one more time, thanks for coming out. Drive safely to get home. Keep an eye on our website and our Facebook page for future events and activities. Take care.